represents the people's will, which is fathomed in each case by planet-wide votes. Such votes, for which you say elections among yourselves, take place in accordance with proposals, etc. from the people, but also in accordance with the ideas and proposals of the central spirit leadership or with regard to advice from the High Council. In the past, when separation and discord still prevailed among our peoples, institutions of the aforementioned kind also existed, of course, whereby these were likewise exposed to attacks by discontented ones, etc., as this will also be the case on the earth in the coming time in different countries, which is why the institution's own alert forces and protective forces will no longer be sufficient and will be reinforced over time by the police and army. Thus, our very distant ancestors had the same problems with discontented ones, with fanatics, terrorists, and assassins, with regard to attacks and destructions, etc. on the aforementioned institutions, whereby also racial hatred, hatred of foreigners, and other degenerate extremism played important roles. In order to protect the institutions, and indeed also a wide variety of others that had official forms of government, a decision was put into effect, which stipulated that all governmental buildings and administrative buildings, etc. be banned from all residential areas and be transferred to uninhabited areas that were exclusively valid for the purpose of the institutions, and that, of course, also found appropriate formations with water features, trees, and all sorts of bushes, flowers, and other plants. Far outside of these institutional systems, so that the residents didn't feel trapped and imprisoned, everything was fenced in and was equipped with security equipment, which made it absolutely impossible for an undetected penetration by water, land, or air, as well as for a penetration of an underground kind. In this connection, there were also guards who closely monitored every person and every vehicle or aircraft, when allowed entry, driving, or flying into the secured area. Through this, unauthorized ones were prevented from entering the premises and causing harm as well as disaster and destruction and endangering human lives. Billy says it is always said that sea salt should be much healthier than regular table salt. Probably for this reason, namely that it is supposed to be healthier, it is also sold at much higher prices than normal salt. Moreover, the prices are set so high that they are often 40 or 50 times higher, or even more, than what traditional table salt costs. Quetzal says that is undoubtedly an evil scam because sea salt doesn't contain any better or higher values than actual table salt. Both salts correspond to the same values. Therefore, when it is maintained that sea salt contains better values or is healthier than the so-called normal salt, this corresponds to a lie, if not fraud, since very high prices are demanded for it and, thus, dishonest business practices are pursued with this. Billy says you once explained to me as Semyaza and Pata have also done this, that Nazi doctors as well as Nazi surgeons, in collaboration with Nazi psychologists and Nazi psychiatrists, were involved in the sterilization by force of thousands of women of the Jewish faith, as well as members of the Sinti and Roma and also criminals and those hindering consciousness, during World War II. You also said that the same activities were also quite common in Switzerland, as well as in Sweden and France, in America and in the Soviet Union. In Sweden alone, so you said, more than 60,000 women were maltreated in this inhumane and legally untenable form. Quetzal says that is correct. But the whole thing still has no end, for in different countries, this inhumane practice is still secretly operated. And indeed, even in Switzerland, in France, the Soviet Union, and in America. But also in Sweden, this doing is still common in secret. Of course, this fact is vehemently denied in all countries, and this evil is practiced under the strictest secrecy. As we know, Switzerland already practiced this inhumane unworthiness at the end of the 19th century, while Sweden and France first began with this practice in the 20s of the 20th century, which is also true of the Soviet Union as well as America. The justifications for these atrocities ranged from preventing or eradicating unworthy life up to the need for relevant researches in order to gain medical insights, etc., from which new medicines and methods of health treatment could allegedly be investigated and produced. But overall, this action corresponded and corresponds to an inhumane, criminal act beyond compare. There is never an excuse for this. Billy says I think so too. But when I keep in mind how these women suffered in their thoughts and feelings and in their psyches, as well as in their consciousnesses, and how they must continue to suffer, then I blow my top off. Yet it seems quite absurd to me if I overexert myself over this, so it's probably better that I let time run its course and wait until sooner or later, everything comes to the public's attention, and through this, these crimes against women will be combated and come to an end. I still think it's important to say, which you have mentioned, that particularly in Switzerland, the authorities, such as the poor offices and guardianship authorities, in collaboration with the doctors of psychiatry and surgery, were the criminal and felonious gang that was responsible for these horrible atrocities, along with certain aid agencies that tore families apart and destroyed them, such as the Pro Juventud, about which I also know how to sing a bad song, and indeed, not just with respect to the wanderers, that is the Yenish, through whom a tremendous amount of suffering was caused by this organization. And since I'm already talking about the aid agencies, then I would also like to address you on the international aid agencies as well as on the children's aid agencies and on the United Nations, that is the UN. Regarding many of these relief agencies or organizations, I have had very bad experiences in different countries, but I've also heard incredible complaints from children, adolescents, and young as well as older women, who told me their concerns and problems. So for example, when I was in Meteoropathy in New Delhi in India, each week, I picked up a small hand cart full of instant milk at a European and American aid agency, in order, then, to feed it to the dogs in our animal station. For this milk donated by the people of the United States we paid $5 to $10 in each case. On the other hand, I experienced, like in a sect church, various food that was donated in such a way, which was sold to the believers, and it was such that those who received the most were the ones who had donated most diligently to the collections. But that's not all, because what I saw myself and what children, adolescents, and women also complained to me was that they often only received donated food or other relief supplies if they fulfilled the sexual desires of the members or helpers of the aid agencies, or when they let themselves be sexually abused and, thus, raped without resistance. This was likewise explained to me by children, adolescents, and younger as well as older women, who, as refugees, were dependent on food or any other relief supplies. Several of those who complained to me of their suffering were pregnant or had given birth to children through these criminal machinations of the helpers of aid agencies. Quetzal says the unpleasant events relating to this, as well as your experiences from your childhood, are well known to me. It really is a shame how these so-called aid agencies have behaved in earlier times and what power they have exercised, to which also the authorities, psychiatrists, doctors, surgeons, poor care and guardianship offices have stooped. But likewise to be described as a shame and as criminally inhumane are also the events mentioned by you and the conduct of the members and helpers of the aid agencies. This also applies to the relevant criminal machinations of the fallible ones who belong to the UN. But unfortunately, it is also the case that these practices still continue to be operated by the irresponsible ones, and therefore, there is still no end in sight in this regard. Still, nothing about this has become public, therefore, everything will continue for quite some time. And when the time comes when everything reaches the public's attention, it will be such as it is always the case when any atrocities and crimes are uncovered, that the responsible persons will act often against better knowledge as though they didn't have the slightest idea of everything and, thus, will be totally shocked. This can be expected with a clear conscience, in reference to the remark, because we know the circumstances and machinations of the fallible ones in the aforementioned form very well through our own observations, therefore, I can also confirm your statement. Billy says